Before we begin, thank you for watching. If you enjoy stories where karma doesn't miss, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who knows bad deeds don't go unpunished. Now, let's begin. People walk past him every day. Some pretend not to see him. Others scoff, quicken their pace, or clutch their bags tighter. To most, he's just another homeless man. A fixture near the homeless encampments not far from the police department in downtown Oakland, where tents cluster along the sidewalks and stories go untold. To them, he's nobody. But they don't know him like I do. His name is Joseph. Joe, to the few who've ever cared enough to ask. 50-something, dark brown skin, graying beard, gentle eyes, and hands that have seen too many winters without gloves. He speaks softly, carries a tattered army duffel that's more patch than fabric, and whistles a tune I've never been able to place. I met him 6 months ago when I moved back to Oakland after a bitter divorce. My world was collapsing, and there he was, offering me half a sandwich and a smile. Joe's been here longer than most, born and raised in Oakland. He used to be a veterinarian, the kind who knew every pet's and pet owner's name. His clinic in Alameda was beloved. Dogs tugged their leashes to get through the door, and parents brought their children to watch him work. He hosted free bi-monthly vaccination clinics, gave discounts to seniors, and once treated a pigeon with a fractured wing just because a boy cried so hard and begged him not to let it die. He also refused to euthanize healthy animals brought in by uncaring owners. But everything changed after his wife passed. His wife died unexpectedly, an aneurysm, and the grief swallowed him whole. He slipped into a bottle, lost his clinic, and then his home. The streets became his reality, but not his identity. This story isn't just about him. It's about how people can be wrong. Loudly, proudly wrong, and how sometimes the universe decides to correct them in the most ironic way possible. It started with Officer Rick Donovan, Bay Area born and badge heavy. He's the kind of cop who treats every minor infraction like a felony, the type who says he protects and serves, but only seems to protect his ego and serve his superiority complex. He lives in Pittsburgh in the kind of house that looks like it's never been lived in. Pristine lawn, American flag, no laughter. Donovan had his eyes on Joe for months, always muttering under his breath about removing the trash. He didn't see a man, he saw a statistic, a blemish. On a gray Thursday morning, just as a brutal storm was sweeping through the bay, I watched it happen. Donovan pulled up in his squad car, lights flashing like Joe was holding hostages instead of huddling with animals. He barked orders, strutting up like a rooster in uniform. Joe was at a covered bus stop, standing next to a makeshift shelter he'd fashioned using an old shopping cart, some worn blankets, and a tarp riddled with holes and duct tape. The shopping cart was lined with threadbare blankets and partially covered by the tarp that had seen better days, its corners weighted down with rocks. Joe had propped up a large cardboard box on top of the shopping cart to create a dome-like structure against the wind and rain, forming a protective den for 4 wet animals, 3 kittens, and a scrappy-looking terrier puppy nestled inside. It wasn't much, but it was better and safer than the storm. A shaggy brown dog lying on an old blanket was curled protectively around the cart's base, nose twitching. An older golden retriever was on guard, licking water off the nearby pavement. Next to Joe's side was an adult tabby cat watching everything, calm and unbothered, like it had seen it all before. "Move along," Donovan barked. "You can't loiter here." Joe didn't argue. He rarely did. They're cold, just trying to provide them with some shelter from the rain. You're obstructing public space, Donovan snapped. This is a citation. Joe nodded and slowly started packing up. One kitten mewled and tried to follow his hand. The golden retriever stepped forward as if sensing something wasn't right. That's when Donovan grabbed Joe by the wrist and twisted him around. I pulled out my phone, hit record. "This man isn't hurting anyone," I said. Donovan turned, his face pinched. "Stay out of this." "I'm a taxpayer," I replied. "So technically, this is my business too." He cuffed Joe and muttered, "Public nuisance." I posted the video on my TikTok account, and it went viral, racking up 1.5 million views in 4 days. Not because of my commentary, but because of what Joe said, just before he was taken away. "If being kind's a crime, write me up twice." That line exploded across the internet. Memes, t-shirts, art prints, even a coffee mug. People weren't just angry, they were activated. Comments poured in. "This man's got more heart than half the city council. The cop should be ashamed. He's doing more good than most of us." News stations covered the story. Then a local podcast, followed by a national one. But the real spark came from a woman named Cassie Reyes, a 20-something real estate agent and animal rescue volunteer. She watched the video and posted it with a caption that read, "Let's flip the script. Let's give this man a home." She launched a GoFundMe campaign titled "Give Joe a Home." The initial goal was $25,000. In 48 hours, it had crossed $75,000. By day 5, it was $650,000. Former colleagues from the veterinarian field reached out, some shocked to see him alive, others ashamed they hadn't looked sooner. They offered help getting his license reinstated, guided him through recertification, and connected him with professional networks. One even invited him to co-host a vet podcast about animal trauma and healing, where Joe spoke candidly about what animals can teach us about resilience and forgiveness. Pet supply companies pledged donations. Someone even offered a year's worth of pet food. Then came the kicker. Cassie found a listing for a nice-sized 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in Pittsburgh. When the paperwork went through and Joe got the keys, the story shifted again. The moving truck turned onto a quiet street, its tires rolling over the pavement before entering a driveway. The engine shut off, and for a beat, there was nothing but the creak of the cab door opening. Then Joe stepped out, steady and composed, wearing a clean collared shirt, his salt and pepper beard freshly trimmed. In his left arm, he carried a crate of 3 now fluffy kittens, Stormy, Drizzle, and Rain. In his right hand, he held the leashes of his 3 dogs, Scout, Rascal, and Honey, who wagged their tails like they knew this was home. Tucked behind Joe's back, perched contentedly inside a cushioned backpack, was Ms. Racine, the adult tabby cat, her eyes sweeping the block like she was already in charge. Behind him came a slow trickle of friends. Cassie, the realtor-turned-friend, a couple of former veterinarian colleagues, and several new neighbors who had donated to the GoFundMe campaign and wanted to welcome him to the neighborhood. I was there too, standing a few steps behind with bags of treats for the animals. Joe had become more than just a story to me. He was a friend. Across the thin strip of the property line Joe shared with his neighbor came a shadow. Then Donovan appeared and stood stiffly on his lawn, clenched fists by his sides. He didn't speak, just stared. A man once arrested for being a nuisance was a homeowner again, and the man who'd tried to erase him had front row seats to the comeback no one saw coming. Donovan's face twisted between disbelief and fury as Joe, calm as ever, walked up and stood on his front steps with dignity and grace, with his animals in tow. For once, Donovan said nothing. "And Joe?" He smiled and said loud enough for everyone to hear, especially Donovan, "Guess we're neighbors now. Nice neighborhood." Donovan stormed off and entered his house. Joe then joked, "I guess it's too soon to ask him if I can borrow his lawnmower." Everyone laughed, and we continued to have a great time. Every second Sunday, Joe hosts a neighborhood gathering. It started with just a few neighbors and coffee. But it grew. Someone donated folding chairs. Another brought a Bluetooth speaker that eventually turned into a small table setup for a DJ. Then came the food truck, offering discounted tacos. What was once a simple gathering is now a community ritual. Part block party, part open-air therapy session. Strays, both animals and people, show up. Teens with nowhere else to go. Old men who've stopped talking to their families, and people like me who are still picking up the pieces. Joe talks about animal behavior and shares old stories from his clinic days, like when a parrot cursed him out mid-exam, or how his wife used to joke that he preferred dogs to people. He checks in on his guests, remembers names, and even remembers whose daughter just made varsity cheerleading or whose cat he had performed surgery on the week before. People open up to Joe like they wish they could to a therapist. He listens like he has nowhere else to be. His backyard? Transformed into a sanctuary. Raised beds of catnip and lavender, a sandbox, and a scratching jungle for the cats, water bowls, chew toys, and shaded spots with doggy beds for the dogs to nap. Miss Racine perches like a queen on the gazebo railing, overseeing all. A wooden sign set into the ground reads, "All creatures welcome." Meanwhile, Donovan's house is quieter than ever. At first, Donovan tried to pretend nothing had changed. He kept his routine, lawn meticulously mowed, driveway and front walkway swept, morning jogs stiff and expressionless. But as the months passed, Donovan noticed Joe wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. Then the whispers began. Complaints against Donovan from years ago surfaced online. Police activists dug into his past and found patterns. He issued thousands of trivial citations to the homeless, and excessive force complaints about him made by the homeless were swept under the rug. Local news stations blasted the story. Editorials called Donovan a symbol of everything wrong with how cities police the homeless. Eventually, Donovan was terminated from the police department. His dismissal wasn't just administrative, it was very public, reported on the evening news, and circulated widely online. His neighbors stopped waving. His once manicured lawn grew wild, and a "for sale" sign stood crooked in his yard. And Donovan? He now watches it all unfold from behind a curtain, trapped in the house next door to the man he tried to erase. Joe didn't want revenge. He wanted dignity. But the universe? It gave him both. And now, when people walk on that block, they slow down, not because of suspicion, but because of hope. Sometimes, people stop by Joe's to drop off a bag of cat or dog food. Occasionally, you'll see Joe sitting outside with a random visitor in his driveway. Neighborhood kids toss balls to his dogs, scratch Miss Racine under the chin, or play with the younger cats. It's funny how a man once ignored becomes the soul of a neighborhood, and a man once in charge becomes the ghost next door. Was justice served? Comment your thoughts below.